Welcome back, Baltimore Positive 1570 AM WNST. Our first guest today is our very own Luke Jones. Luke, welcome in.
Dennis, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. Hope the same with you. And Wednesday was just a terrible day for the Baltimore Ravens, and with the death of Jalen Ferguson and also Tony Siragusa.
Yeah, I mean, just a very somber, very sad day. I know many people have said it, and it's hard to even find a comparison as far as the saddest day in the history of the Baltimore Ravens. When you lose someone at the age of 26 years old, I mean, forget about the football side of it. And, we talk about these guys in the football context 98% of the time, but talking about a 26-year-old with three young children, his whole life ahead of him, regardless of what was going to happen this year with the Ravens or the rest of his NFL career. I mean, so much to look forward to and to just be gone. It's just unthinkable. It's unspeakable. So trying to process that, as a Ravens fan base, and, trying to process that as anyone who knew Jalen Ferguson. I did not know him particularly well, had a couple experiences here and there with him, especially his rookie year before the pandemic. But to hear that news and then several hours later to hear about Tony Siragusa, I mean, kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. I mean, you have an unproven young Ravens player who you're hoping, is going to have a long, fruitful career. You're hoping at the very least for his sake, but because you remind yourself these are human beings. He has a very long, prosperous, successful, happy life ahead of him at such a young age. And then you have Tony Siragusa, who still far too young at age 55, but beloved in this city. And you think about, when he arrived, what the Ravens were in the context of, Baltimore sports and trying to establish themselves and not really having much of an identity. And here's this guy who was an Indianapolis Colt. I mean, my goodness, in 1997, that had a much different connotation than it does today. Much more bitterness, much more disdain. Yeah. And he played at Pitt, and thinking about that and what the Steelers would become as far as Ravens-Steelers rivalry and all of that. Yet he carved out such a special place in Baltimore Ravens lore in just 5 years playing here. Heck of a football player. I think don't let the personality and, in the same way that he drew comparisons to Art Donovan from yesteryear, a previous generation, Baltimore Colts fans, saw some of those similarities, albeit in a different era. In the same way, you could say the same thing about the late Art Donovan. Don't let the personality and the sense of humor and all those elements disguise the fact that, boy, heck of a football player. And that's who Tony Siragusa was. So, when you have those two losses I mean, just one of those is awful enough to have two in the same day. I mean, it's just, it was a very sad day for the Baltimore Ravens, and particularly sad for, the families and friends and those who loved Jalen Ferguson and Tony Siragusa.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And and as we discussed, both men, God rest their soul, there's just a lot more to talk about with Tony. He lived longer. There's just more to talk about, more to unpack with him. My two favorite memories of him, I'm sure you have a lot as well, was the one time he said we were playing the Steelers, and he said, "Look, if you see them in a bathroom, give them the business." And that was really, really funny. And then the Super Bowl, right? When Dwayne Starks picked off, was it Kerry Collins?
Mm-hmm.
And Siragusa made like a basketball hoop with his arms, and then Starks did like a reverse jam. That was like one of that is burning my memory forever. It's just such a happy memory.
Yeah, my telling image, my lasting image of Tony Siragusa, and I only had the chance to meet him a couple times. I mean, long after his career. I mean, I was a senior in high school when the Ravens, the 2000 Ravens were winning the Super Bowl. So, my perspective of him is much more from afar as a fan. But I think of him at the end of the divisional playoff win over Tennessee. And I actually tweeted this out a couple years back when Lamar Jackson famously wore the Oakleys on the sideline in the fourth quarter, the final minutes of that win at Cincinnati. That was the Lamar spin game, if you recall. But he wore the sunglasses, and it immediately struck me that it reminded me of Tony Siragusa commandeering Brian Billick's sunglasses at the end of the Titans game. And NFL Films famously had the mics on the sideline and talking about how they're going to California. They're going to be playing the Raiders in the AFC Championship the following week. But just that image of him in those sunglasses, I mean, this 340-pound behemoth of a defensive tackle with these little aviator sunglasses on, but he just had this swagger to him. But I mean, his persona, I said this to Nestor in our conversation. I think we use the term larger than life way too much, if we're being honest, in how we talk about people, whether we're talking about celebrities or pseudo celebrities, or whether we're just talking about people in our own daily lives. There probably aren't quite as many people who truly fit that description as we use it for. But I think in the case of Tony Siragusa, it absolutely was appropriate because of his size, because of his personality. And I think what's so interesting about him, keep in mind, he played in an era when social media, I mean, the internet was just becoming a thing, really. So for him to have the platform that Hard Knocks provided him in 2001, you have to think that that's what propelled him to being able to work in, for Fox Sports all those years as an NFL analyst, being able to, guest star on The Sopranos, which I mean was a huge deal in the early 2000s. For him to have that, and for him to be featured so prominently on Hard Knocks, which 2 decades later, a show that's still going strong, but is a show that I've found most seasons to be pretty dull. But that 2001 Ravens team being on that, and knowing that there's a 30 for 30 coming, I mean, Tony Siragusa was perfect for that. I mean, for not just Baltimore, but for an entire country, an entire sports world to see what kind of personality he had. Again, I stress, he backed it up on the field. I mean, he was a heck of a football player. I mean, we think of Ray Lewis as one of the greatest defensive players of all time. Ray would be the first to tell you, guys like Tony Siragusa were just absolutely critical for Ray to become the player he did, because it's the brick wall up front. He and Sam Adams occupying blockers. I mean, just completely keeping blockers off of Ray Lewis for him to roam sideline to sideline. But for Tony Siragusa to then do what he did after football, I mean, that's pretty special. That's not something that he didn't play in New York. He didn't play in Los Angeles. He didn't play in this major market. I mean, he was in Indianapolis, and then he was in Baltimore. So for him to have that opportunity to be part of Hard Knocks, that I can't help but think, and I'm sure he's probably talked about that, at different points, but can't help but think that wasn't so huge for him to get opportunities that he did after his football career then, but going to miss him. There's no question about that. I mean, some of the memories you mentioned, I mean, how about the fact that he suffered a bruised spinal cord in that Tennessee game in 2001? And look, hindsight 20 years later, you cringe at the fact that he did that. But he went back into the game. I mean, he was carted off and everything. And here he's back in the game. And I mean, but that right there spoke to how much he cared about his teammates and how much he cared about the game. So as much as you can talk about the personality and, being on TV and, being a football analyst years later and all that, he cared about the game and he cared about his teammates. And he really, that's something that is crazy. And I'll say it, he shouldn't have done that. That's stating the obvious, right? But for him to have done that, that just speaks to, he was a throwback, and they don't make him like him. I would say anymore, but they didn't make very many like him, period. And that really speaks to what I said about him truly fitting the description of larger than life.
Now, Larry Webster says, we all have a twin somewhere except Tony Siragusa. He said he was truly one of a kind, truly one of one. And now, Luke, the ESPN 30 for 30 takes even more of a significant meaning, not just in the sporting world, but just in life in general.
Yeah, it really does. Nestor and I talked about this. I mean, we mentioned the late Chuck Evans, who was part of that Super Bowl 35 team, and now you have Tony Siragusa, and I think it's a reminder, not to get too, too philosophical here, but I think it's just a reminder to enjoy the journey. I mean, nothing here is guaranteed for any of us, and I mean, I think for me personally, not to make it too, I don't want to make it about myself, but when you lose someone like Tony Siragusa and what he meant to that era of the Ravens, I think about my dad and how I enjoyed that era so much with him. And he passed in 2004, so it's not that many years after that. So it's just a reminder that enjoy the journey. And we get so caught up in, if you and I, before Wednesday, we were talking about Jalen Ferguson, we were probably talking about him in terms of, is he going to live up to a third round billing? Is this going to be the year that, he kind of figures it out, or are the Ravens going to move on? Is he going to move on? And, but you just think about it and look, it's about results. And that's why we know these guys. I mean, we know Tony Siragusa because he was a heck of a football player, right? And we have these memories of him because he was a heck of a football player, even if it had more to do with his personality in a lot of ways. But, you just remember at the end of the day, these are all human beings, and we all try to do the best we can. We all make mistakes. We all have our successes, and we have many more failures than successes, and most of the time. But to enjoy that journey, because you look back and it's crazy to think. I mean, it's been 25 years since Tony Siragusa signed with the Ravens. I just think about what that franchise was at that point and what it's become over a quarter century. And as successful as they've been, the confetti's only fallen twice over that time, and when I say only, I don't mean that as a knock on them. That's great. I mean, there's franchises who haven't even sniffed being in that situation, and they've existed far longer. But it's a reminder that to enjoy every step of it, because if it's all about just being the best or always about winning, then you're not going to enjoy a whole lot of it. And I think Tony Siragusa probably a great example. What we know of him, and again, you only know of a person so much, but he's certainly someone who seemed to appreciate smelling slowing down, smelling the roses, taking it in, enjoying life, and just remembering that side of it. And again, I think back to those years, and we've talked about this before at different points. We talked about the 30 for 30 thing and the gathering, the reunion that they did with the 2000 Ravens. But the Ravens could win 5 more Super Bowls in the next 20 years. They could be the next Patriots. But I can say it now, and it's different for each person because we all are at different points in our lives, and we all have different memories. I mean, my experience of being growing up an Orioles fan and covering the team is not the same experience as someone who enjoyed the mid 60s through the early 80s and was alive for that era. But I think for the Ravens, nothing will ever top that 2000 team and those early teams where, just sitting there watching that Super Bowl team. And I remember Tony Siragusa famously was the first one introduced for the Super Bowl intros. And I remember that they had an official there out of the tunnel, just kind of, trying to get the timing right. They're trying to produce it right. And he started running too soon, and that person stopped him. I actually rewatched this because I just wanted to make sure my memory was correct. And if looks could kill, he looked at that person and said, you could tell he just had a look in his eye like, what are you doing? and then he ran through the road. The Ravens players lined up, and you can hear it, picked it up on the microphone. Let's bleep and rock. And you just think back to that, and I think back to watching that and how just 5 years before, Baltimore didn't even have a team, and at that point, didn't really think Baltimore was going to get a team after the expansion failure. And to think back now all these years later, and to think of that team, to think of him, to think about all those other players who are still with us, you just appreciate it that much more. And I think that's the lesson, to enjoy the journey. And we talk about this all the time with the current Ravens, and they win a Super Bowl, and what's going to happen with Lamar's contract, and all those different things. Let's not forget to enjoy it in the process. And I think we do for the most part. But I think things of this nature happen. Whether it's football players or someone else in our life, you lose someone in your life. It's just a reminder that nothing's guaranteed, and that's why you enjoy those experiences as much as you can, because you don't know for sure if there's going to be a tomorrow.
And to your point, Luke, about enjoying the journey, here's another Indianapolis Colts tie-in, unfortunately. But Jimmy Irsay tweeted out that he said that the Greeks, and I'm sure he was referencing the ancient Greeks, not the modern-day Greeks. When somebody would pass, they would ask, did he live with passion? And I think without a doubt that Tony Siragusa lived with passion, and that came out with everything that he did. It showed And now the stories are coming out from his former teammates and friends and family, and the stories are there. So Brian Billick quote that he was very much involved in the community, did things for others that people don't know about. Brandon Stokely talked about how mean Tony Siragusa was to him as a rookie, but once he made the team, how genuine he was and how helpful and a wonderful teammate.
Yeah, and I was actually going to bring up Brandon Stokely because I think that's interesting, and we have these debates, and certainly some elements of that some people will disagree with, and not to get too far down the rabbit hole of
Sure.
hazing, or it's even been it's been topical of the rookie dinners that are done, where the vets spend all this money and everything, and not to get too much into that, but he was very old school in the sense of this is a fraternity that really means something, and it means something to be part of this 53-man roster. It means something to be part of this football team. And keep in mind, Brandon Stokely was a rookie in 99. So this was before the Ravens had won anything. I mean, they hadn't even had a non-losing season at that point, that training camp of 1999. So yeah, guys like Tony Siragusa and probably Rod Woodson and Rob Burnett, and go down the list of some of the more veteran guys on that roster. They were going to be a little more protective of what it meant to be part of a 53-man roster. But you just said it, from the time a guy makes it, and we saw a glimpse of that in Hard Knocks, right? I mean, we heard Siragusa talk about some of the rookies there, and it was amusing. But yeah, there are elements of that where you'd say, okay, is that really the best attitude to have? But again, he was old school. He'd be the first to tell you that in that way. But once you made it into the door, once you had the invitation, that you're a real part of this football team now going into the season. It talked about how he hadn't had a better teammate than Tony Siragusa. So, there's some lessons there. And again, whether you agree with that mindset or not at the very beginning, and certainly you could probably find veteran players who'd say no, and veteran players are helpful right off the bat, and that's great. And I'm not going to say there's one's more correct than the other necessarily, but spoke to once you were in the door, once you made it, once you were deemed quote worthy. I talked about how great of a teammate he was, and that's something I think is that's pretty cool. Especially for someone who has a very brash, bold personality, a persona. We saw so much of that, with Hard Knocks and everything. But to hear that a guy was a caring teammate too, and there was authenticity when it came to that part of it. That's pretty cool.
And I was 24 years old, just got in the car business. And we had an old retired PT boat captain named Russ Fatsinger at the store. Didn't speak to me for 3 months. He was grunting at me. So one morning I come in, said, Dennis, my boy, come in here. And I just looked around like, me? And he had a bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich for me right there and a hot coffee. He says, welcome. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, well, I didn't know if you were going to make it or not. So he says, I have a rule that with new employees, I don't speak to them for 3 months, and I don't even bother learning their name until I know they're going to be here. So, again, not to make it about me, but I also have a similar story. And there's people like that in life that you've got to earn their respect, you got to earn their trust, and once they feel like you're part of their team, you realize how big of a heart they have.
Yeah, and I mean, we all lead in different ways. We all have different quirks about our personality. We all have different things we value, and that's okay. And we can disagree even about some of the methods, but as you said, clearly that's something that left a major impression with you, and clearly it's something that left a major impression with Brandon Stokely. And again, it's not to say one specific way of doing it is more correct than the other, and all that, but it really does say a lot about how much he valued being a football player. And I think a lot of it acknowledge his background. I mean, he was undrafted coming out of Pitt, and made the Indianapolis roster, and famously drank his $1,000 signing bonus.
How about he refused to learn the Pitt fight song? Do you see that story? He said had he known if he wanted to learn a school fight song, he would have went to Notre Dame. I mean, he told us to the coach. Who does that?
That's great. I mean, one of a kind, right?
And the pranks, right? He locked the tight ends, right? Locked them in a room with Shannon Sharp, and then Sharp stole his pickup truck until he apologized. I mean, you can't make that stuff up.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's why I said, I mean, that season of Hard Knocks, and again, I've watched seasons since then, and some have been good. Let's be clear about that. But I found a lot of them to be very dull. And beyond just being interested in the NFL and interested in football, there wasn't a whole lot memorable about it, right? that season with Siragusa and with Shannon Sharp, the rookie talent show famously. I mean, some of those
Oh
guys, I
yeah,
mean, the guy who
yeah,
imitated Shannon Sharp was just hilarious.
yeah.
But you look at that, I mean, that was really fun TV. And I mean, so much of, I think so much of, the anticipation for Hard Knocks was Ray Lewis, right? I mean, this was a year removed from everything that happened in Atlanta and the murder trial and all that. Talking about it in terms of interest outside Baltimore, but
Sure.
here you have this, this fat 340-pound defensive tackle, Tony Siragusa, who, you know, was known, but it's not like this guy was a multi-time All-Pro or anything like that. And he and Shannon Sharp just completely stole the show. I mean, Shannon Sharp had been known because he had such accomplishments in Denver for so many years before that. But Tony Siragusa, I mean, again, that propelled him. I mean, I don't think there's any question. I mean, is he, is he guest starring on The Sopranos? Is he becoming an analyst on Fox? If he didn't really get the platform to shine on Hard Knocks, very well possible not. So, I mean, it's just, they didn't make him like him. I mean, there's no question about that. And, again, just sad to see him go, too young. And, and again, not to overlook Jalen Ferguson too much. I mean, just a different kind of tragedy there. That, I mean, with such young children, whole life ahead of him. Just a reminder that life is precious, and again, nothing's guaranteed.
And the NFL, Luke, is such a brotherhood now. I've played basketball, football, lacrosse, but with football, it's different. You're in the weight room. You're doing two-a-days. You're doing OTAs. The injuries. I mean, it's such a sport that you really have to bond with your teammates in order to be successful. Unlike any other sport, I'm sure hockey has some of those elements, but football is just one of those unique sports, and I think that's why we love it so much.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I would also say it's a sport that takes an extraordinary commitment, even at a young age. I mean, I started playing football, I want to say, I think fourth grade was my first year playing football. And full pads, tackle, all that. And can debate whether that's wise for a fourth grader, but that's a discussion for another day. But, I loved it, but boy, there was also those days where there was a dread to it, like going to practice and as you get into high school, two-a-days and everything. And I played through high school. I did not play in college. I could have if I wanted to and gone to a Division III school or something like that, but I didn't have that strong interest to do it. But one thing that I've always cautioned, and I did this recently, my mom, one of her daycare kids that she watches, he's playing football this year. And I said to him, hey, it's exciting you're going to play, but you really need to make sure you really want to play, because it's a lot. It's a big commitment, and it takes a lot of discipline, and you need to make sure you're getting your homework done and all those different things. But boy, how gratifying it can be, the bonds. I just recently, we got together with my friend John. Got together with him on a Monday night watching Orioles game, and but we played football together, growing up and through high school. And, we have a text chain with a bunch of our other friends that we played football with growing up. And, we may go, especially with the pandemic, we may go long periods of time without seeing each other. But boy, we still rag on each other. We still, we're there for each other. Someone's going through a tough time. We're supporting each other and praying for each other and all that. I mean, it really is a fraternity that, like you said, not saying that doesn't exist in other sports, but I think football with, you hear the bunker mentality a lot. And I'm leery of using that comparison too much, because it's not the military. It's not the war, things of that nature that are real life serious. But there are some, even if it's very on a superficial level, there are some elements of that you're in something together and you're going through something. And boy, there are a lot of days, most days, I'd say sometimes, where you don't want to practice, but you care about it, and you care about your teammates, and you have that mindset where, there's a greater good at work here. And, that's why, as much as, there's the danger and the safety side of it and the head injuries and all that make me take pause, especially for young people playing football. But very rewarding, some of the most rewarding experiences of my life. And that's someone who did it on a completely insignificant, inconsequential level. So, talking about someone like a Tony Siragusa and, what those guys did back in the day, I mean, pretty special. And it's why guys like you and me are talking about it 20 years later.
Absolutely. They certainly left a mark in our lives, and we were thoroughly entertained by their commitment to excellence. Luke, I appreciate your time as always, your insight, your input. Please tell our listeners where they can find you on social media, all the great stuff you do for WNST Baltimore Positive, as well as your blog.
Absolutely. I encourage everyone to follow us on Twitter at WNST. You can follow me personally at Baltimore Luke, as I will be going on vacation here over the next couple weeks, doing my annual trip to Wildwood with family. But certainly be rejoining you, Dennis, in the near future, and be back at the ballpark in no time. Training camp only a month away. I mean, hopefully the next time when we convene to talk, happier things to talk about, but certainly remembering Jalen Ferguson's family, keeping them in our prayers, and keeping the loved ones of Tony Siragusa in our prayers as well. But check out my blog at baltimorepositive.com. Sponsored by Coons Baltimore Ford. You want to be on the WNST Baltimore Positive text service, sponsored by Coons Baltimore Ford. Not the happiest of texts, to say the least, to be sending out here recently with the tragedy with Jalen Ferguson, the death of Tony Siragusa, but any significant local sports news sent directly to your mobile device via the WNST Baltimore Positive text service, sponsored by Coons Baltimore Ford. And of course, anything throughout the week on AM 1570 with Nestor. Plenty of great retro throwback conversations with Tony Siragusa, the latest on the Ravens, the Orioles. Check out all of that at baltimorepositive.com.
All right, Luke, appreciate it again. Have a great time with your family and create more wonderful memories.
Absolutely, Dennis. Be well. And hey, next time we're talking on the air, we'll be much closer to training camp and really ramping up, talking about these 2022 Ravens.
Absolutely. There he goes, Luke Jones here on 1570 AM Baltimore Positive. WNST will take a quick break and come back right after this.